Welcome back. Now, opposition parties in Parliament have poured water on government's performance under the leadership of President Cyril Ramaphosa. Some political parties said that the country is actually worse off under Ramaphosa's administration, asserting that South Africa requires nothing short of a miracle to eliminate unemployment and that the president must not be happy that so many South Africans are actually living on social grants. Others, of course, said that the number of cabinet members needs to be reduced as this has not had much of an impact despite its size. Opposition MPs also tore into President Ramaphosa's State of the Nation address, calling it a hollow speech full of empty slogans, while ANC members of Parliament came to the president's defense. Political commentator and Rhodes University lecturer Dr Thapelo Tselapedi joins us now just to unpack some of what happened on day one of that SONA debate. Dr Tselapedi, thanks for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
No, thank you. Thank you. And hi to your audience.
So I'm curious to know what stood out for you and what were some of the key takeaways, would you say, from those debate speeches yesterday?
I mean, I think there was a lot of, people just making jokes. There was a lot of sort of things around responding to instances around GBV, but it didn't quite sound like GBV. Whereas other opposition parties quite clearly were talking about things around crime, things around sort of what's happening in the state of South Africa with regards to unemployment and so forth. So obviously from the opposition benches, it seemed that they were a lot more genuine about raising those issues, whereas I think from the part of the ANC, they seemed more to be more jovial around some of our problems. So that was quite discernible on my part. Other than that, I think there were quite a number of things said in response to the SONA, and I think it's important to unpack those.
So let's attempt to do that. As expected, issues around the energy crisis, load shedding, the declaration of a state of disaster around this matter, that of course took center stage.
Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of people, the issue one is around the state of disaster, and then the creation of a ministry around the electricity crisis. But also for quite a number of responses, you would have seen that there is a genuine and valid fear around a repeat of the COVID-19 funds where they were looted, where given the lockdown, legally it sort of gave the governing party, not necessarily the national or provincial, wherever, the I guess leeway to loot. So I think for quite a number of people, legitimately so, and to that extent they represent quite a number of interests outside of Parliament, that all of what the president said on the issue of the state of disaster is just going to give a number of their representatives leeway to loot the state. And I think there has to be a way in which, I mean, we're waiting for the president to then also respond. There has to be a way in which the ANC is adequately can back up their statements around that. But also, there's quite a lot of issues around then this ministry, what happens to this ministry, particularly if you look at the banter between Tategwere Mantashe and Mr. Pravin Gordhan. So I think the president would need to speak quite clearly on the role and responsibilities of that ministry.
Two other things around that. I think it was the DA Celius Brink who highlighted once again the fact that the DA was going to take this matter of the state of disaster to court. So again, outlining why they thought this was a bad idea in terms of just the powers with which government can then go through certain processes unfettered. So that was the one thing. And then there was, of course, the Premier of the Western Cape, Alan Winde, poking some really deep holes into what was said by the president during his State of the Nation address as far as the energy situation goes.
Look, I think one, just to go back to your first question around the issue of was the issue of the state of disaster and them going to court around litigating because they feel like the state of disaster under the ANC is too broad. Yes. Now, what's interesting about the DA is that for the first part, they did initially call for a state of disaster. obviously they called it under quite limited and specific instances. But if you look at, obviously, the declaration made via the Act under Mezuma, you will realize that indeed it is broad, and I think the ministry has to be given some time to see how they're going to enact that. I was also quite a bit taken aback by the broadness of the enactment of the state of disaster. So I think it's quite important that the executive, responds to that. The second part around Ellen Wind, I think he tore into what I thought really was a decent speech by the president, what I thought represented perhaps some level of cohesion coming from the ANC-NEC post the December conference. But I think Ellen Wind really sort of tore into, specifically when he went into the numbers, and how really, I think, in a number of 200 days, that the president, who was part of the war room years ago under President Jacob Zuma, was not able to add any, whether 1 or 2 megawatts of electricity on the ESCOM grid. So I think that's quite a huge indictment on the part of the president specifically, because it does add to the issue around whether do we believe the president won, and whether do we believe, I think, the ANC broadly. And to that, if I may say, let me just add to this. I think democratic space is closing for this sort of, where the ANC on the one hand gets a negative rating from the public, or low rating, and Cyril Ramaphosa getting a high rating. I think that difference is going to narrow as we move towards national elections. I think the ANC might find itself that it's no longer able to use, I think, Cyril Ramaphosa as a good poster sort of person for that national campaign, given that he's really aligned himself with the ANC. But at some instant, it also looks like, particularly when you look at the issues that they've identified as quite problematic for them at the SOE level and local government, it really does look like he would have to arm himself to go to war with his own party, specifically if you're looking at procurement issues at local government and provincial level. Yeah.
And then just looking at some of the other major issues that South Africa is grappling with, crime, Minister Bheki Cele there, of course, also taking to the podium. And that became quite interesting. I mean, for one, there was the sort of toing and froing with the EFF, whether it was Marshall Dlamini or anyone else. That whole situation involving the IFP and an alleged assassination plot against Marshall Dlamini. What did you make of that, Dr. Tselapedi?
Look, I think that was really worrying. It was worrying because, especially because Marshall Dlamini then came on and said, well, you called me, I didn't call you. You suggested I come to your place and we have that conversation. So, it's worrying because there are material differences about what is the actual story. Clearly, one is lying, and it worries me because, these are people who are supposed to represent us on the part of the EFF, and then on the part of the ANC, these are people who are actually in government. So it's really worrying that there could be sort of, material differences in their own story between them. I think the issue of crime is a big one. It's escalating. We see that now with Nelson Mandela Bay really surpassing Cape Town as sort of crime hotspots. So it's quite clear that the ministry has not been able to apply itself over a number of instances. For instance, if we look at the July unrest as well. So that's been quite problematic for the image of the ANC and for that ministry. So I think it's really worrying, and I think one gets a sense that these guys aren't quite genuine about representing our interests and addressing issues or at least that social problems in this country.
And then UDM leader Bantu Holomisa interestingly went in on basically what had happened with the Defence Force, and making the point that no party actually won the armed struggle. And there's been a lot of calls for quite a while for people to get what is due to them from the SANDF. And that was, for me, quite interesting. What did you make of it?
I mean, I didn't quite get to that around the speech by Mr. Holomisa, so I can't speak on that matter. But to the extent that no party won the armed struggle, that's quite true. Obviously, in comparison to the other liberation movements in Southern Africa, they had a much more stronger, sort of arrangement when it came to the armed struggle. So South Africa, comparatively speaking, did not have as much as them, as organized as them as well, especially when coming into the country, certainly. But any more than that, I can't speak on that matter.
So, John Steenhuisen also talking about what's likely to unfold next year with South Africa going to a general election, and saying that it will either result, that election, in an ANC-led coalition or a DA-led coalition. Your views there, are those the only two possibilities that we're likely to be saddled with?
I mean, of course, the DA, obviously, also given that speech, you could quite see that the DA had hedged their horse on President Cyril Ramaphosa and to that extent on the ANC. And so it is not surprising that they would, from next year after the national elections, see themselves as either leaders of a coalition or the ANC's leaders of a coalition. Now, for a number of years now, the ANC has been decreasing in terms of electoral dominance. Each year, roughly around 3 to 4%, they're losing that much in terms of voter. It's not necessarily that people are voting for opposition parties, it's just that there's voter apathy. So that's one. But nevertheless, South Africa is moving towards coalition. That is going to happen. I cannot obviously predict as to how, what will be the fate of post-elections next year and how the ANC would fare or the DA would fare. But certainly we are moving towards coalition, and I think that's important, and I think that is good. We do need a change in the way in which our political culture has been organized, especially in the context of government and its ability then to respond to citizens' needs.
And finally, 30 seconds, Dr. Tselapedi, Labour Minister Thulas Nxesi, with the high unemployment rate in the country, basically going at the DA and saying that they've been quiet about the exploitation of farm workers and the same for migrants. Is that getting us somewhere towards addressing the high rate of unemployment, which is, of course, itself at crisis levels, especially among the youth in our country?
Yeah, no, look, I think, like I said, some of these things, when you saw at least Parliament, there was a lot of banter, there was a lot of sort of joking around, I think, and I think maybe one of those, that speech is an instance of that. And I think the matter of unemployment, obviously also particularly youth unemployment, is quite a problem in this country. You are a national government, at least on the part of Minister Thulas. You should, and you have the responsibility equally to go to the different provincial departments and see how you can assist them. Because obviously you have a bird's eye view what needs to be done and what industries are quite important in terms of absorbing certain type of skills and targeting different groups in society. So I think a lot of people just need to be quite serious about addressing some of our challenges. I think if it has not hit them, and I think the president had said it in the SONA speech, we are, through the energy crisis, seeing an existent threat to South Africa. And I think that is also because of a lot of issues around crime, unemployment. And it's about time that the ANC takes those things seriously.
Dr. Tselapedi, thank you so much for your time. Political commentator and Rhodes University lecturer, Dr. Thapelo Tselapedi, on what transpired during the first day of the 2023 SONA debate.